Hi, welcome to the internal assessment exploration video. We're going to go through what you need to
I
include in
popped
the
this
first
kind of
here
third
just
of
so you
your
can have a look at what's included in the spec about the exploration section. So it's out of 6. You can see here this is at 1 to 2 marks out of 6, 3 to 4, 5 to 6. It's worth 25% of the total IA because it's 6 out of 24. And the sections that we're going to look at in more detail in the next few slides are background information, variables, equipment, method, risk assessment, and ethical and environmental issues. Pause this if you want to have a quicker read. Okay, so background information needs to be about 1 page of continuous prose writing. It needs to set the scene and provide the context for your investigation. So you want to include information on each of the variables. When I refer to the variables, I mean the independent variable and the dependent variable. So for example, if you were looking at the type of date and the amount of reducing sugar in each date. Then you would talk about dates and give a bit of background on dates as a species. You would then look at the reducing sugar and the test for reducing sugars. What are sugars? Think about the structure of monosaccharides. Give examples. Look at the test for reducing sugars and link it to reducing sugars increase in blood glucose. You need to reference all information. So if you weren't the first person to find it out, you have to reference it. So for example, glucose is a monosaccharide. Unless you were the first person to find that out, you're going to need to reference it. And I'm fairly certain that nobody writing an IA at this point was the first person to find that out. So it doesn't matter how small it seems, you must reference every single piece of information. Okay, you then need to state the variables in a little bit more detail. So you need to state the independent variable and the manipulations of the independent variable. So for example, if you're doing temperature, you need to state the temperatures that you're going to use and state how you're going to change the temperatures. So you might be using an electric water bath, you might be producing your own water baths. Things might be going in different rooms at different temperatures. So you need to state how the different temperatures will be achieved. If the range needs justified, then justify it and include the uncertainty if there is an uncertainty. The dependent variable, so you need to explain how the dependent variable will be measured. So if we are looking at we'll go back to the date one, so different types of dates and the amounts of reducing sugars. For that, you would use a Benedict's test and then a colorimeter to measure the absorption of each solution. You need to explain that in detail. Not too much detail because it's not the method, but in enough detail for the reader to understand. And again, include the uncertainty of the apparatus or the equipment if you need to. For control variables, I always suggest using a table with the following headings. So you state the control variable, you explain why it needs to be controlled and how it will be controlled. So for example, if temperature is a control variable, you need to say why it needs to be controlled. So temperature must be controlled because if the temperature increases, molecules such as enzymes can move around more quickly and reactions will occur more quickly. If the temperature is over the optimum temperature, then proteins or enzymes could denature. This will slow down the rate of the reaction. And then how it will be controlled by using an electronic water bath set to specific temperatures. So you should have at least 5 control variables outlined in that table. Okay, the equipment and method. So you need to list all of the equipment with specific details. So you need beaker size and a volume of distilled water. Be very specific on exactly what you will need. It's like a recipe for a cake. In a recipe for a cake, it wouldn't just say flour, sugar, eggs. It would tell you how much flour, how much sugar, and how many eggs. So be specific in your equipment list. You can include a label diagram of the equipment setup if you want to. Obviously, just take a picture and pop the labels in. The method needs to be written in the third person. You can't say, I will do this or I did this. It should be like reading a recipe from a book. And all of the control variables outlined in your variables section should be acknowledged in the method. So don't just assume that because they're already written down, the reader would know to control them. And then I've said at the end, the method should outline each step like a recipe. So the test is if somebody could redo your investigation in exactly the same way using your method, then your method is fine. because when we mark, we look for whether the method would allow for sufficient, reliable, valid results to be collected. Okay, so your risk assessment, you need to try and outline at least 5 hazards or risks, and outline them in a table similar to below. It doesn't have to be exactly the same headings, you can change them slightly if you want, but you want to outline the hazard. You need to say whether the risk is low, medium, or high and explain how you would control it. So, for example, broken glass. You could say that you would prevent the glass from breaking by ensuring that all glassware is placed in the middle of the desk. However, if any glass is broken, you would um, clean it away using a dustpan and brush and place it in the broken glass bin. So at least 5 hazards. Sometimes students come to me and say there aren't any risks of my investigation. There's always risks. There's not a single investigation without risks. So try and think outside the box a little bit. And then finally, the ethical and environmental issues. So this should be split into 2 paragraphs, one for ethical and one for environmental. For ethical issues, you can't carry out any investigations using animals. So if that's what you've planned, change it. And if you're using human participants, you need to include in an appendix a brief, a debrief, and a consent form. And the appendix forms part of your 6 to 12 pages of the IA. Ethical issues for plants include providing enough water, sunlight, carbon dioxide, and an appropriate temperature for them. That can link back to your background information, because obviously if you're using plants, you will have researched that, so you can link that back there. And if no plants or humans are used, then you still need to think about ethical issues of using chemicals within close range of other students and staff. So are any chemicals going to affect the working environment in any way? For environmental issues, you need to think about waste disposal. So chemicals should be disposed of according to CLIAP's guidelines. If you don't know what this means, then ask the technicians. You need to think about plastics as well. So plastic needs to be disposed of or ideally reused or recycled. The use of foodstuffs, so only buy what you need, and if there's any leftovers, you are going to either put it on a compost heap or you're going to eat it or donate it, something along those lines. Think about the use of single-use plastics. Could you replace single-use plastics with something else? And if so, outline this. So if you have replaced a single-use plastic with something, then outline this in your investigation. Don't assume that the marker will know. And that's all for exploration. Exploration should probably be about 4 pages long, by the way, 3 to 4 pages long in all.